My friend, Dr. Kim Stanton, whom I can't see right now, where are you, Kim? Hiding in the back, is a lawyer whose practice is focused on equality, constitutional and Indigenous rights law. She's a senior fellow of this college and a former legal director of the National Equality Rights Organisation, the Women's Legal Education and Action Fund, of which Mary Eberts was a co-founder. She's a brilliant and slightly weary commissioner of the Mass Casualty Commission, and to me, a feminist anti-racist icon. Many of us in this room have benefited directly from Kim's generosity, her intellectual firepower, her strategic acumen, and her wit. I count myself first among that number. We've all benefited from her refusal to accept exclusionary status quo or to settle for received wisdom about the limits of the legal process. Sure. Let's see if this one's better. Great. We've all benefited from Kim's wisdom, her refusal to accept the exclusionary status quo or to settle for received wisdom about the limits of the legal process. Kim always pushes those around her and the institutions with which she engages to set their sights higher, to be more inclusive, more daring, and ultimately to reach for a more complete vision of justice. Today we're here to celebrate the paradigm-shifting contributions of her book, Reconciling Truths, Reimagining Public Inquiries in Canada, which was published by UBC Press last year. Kim has asked me to introduce our panel and moderate their conversation, and it's my very great honour to introduce two women who join Kim in their strategic insights and their determination to use the law and legal processes as tools for equality and social inclusion. Mary Eberts is a trailblazing lawyer and a human rights advocate who's strengthened the equality rights of women and girls over the course of a career that has included serving on the Canadian Advisory Council for the Status of Women and being a co-founder of Women's Legal Education and Action Fund. She was a key figure in the development and regulation of midwifery in Ontario and has served as litigation counsel, often on a pro bono basis, to the Native Women's Association of Canada for more than 25 years. Jennifer Llewellyn is Professor and Chair in Restorative Justice and Director of the Restorative Research Lab at the Schulich School of Law at Dalhousie University. She's held a number of distinguished visiting positions at international universities, and her teaching and research focus on relational theory and truth commission, among other topics. She's advised governments and NGOs and supported governments in implementing truth and restorative processes, including as Commissioner on the Nova Scotia Restorative Inquiry on the Home for Coloured Children. I'm going to invite our panellists today to begin, and Mary, I'll ask you to speak first if I can, to speak about the importance of Kim's book.
Do you want to stand out?
Oh, thank you. There must be a light that should go on.
It's on. It's on.
Thank you. I'm one of the great techno peasants, and so please forgive me if my sound fades at some point. I am so thrilled to see this room full of people celebrating Kim and her wonderful insights. I wanted to just say that I had the chance to read this book some time ago now, and I've reread it since then. I read it the first time in manuscript form, and I was totally struck by the fact that she began with the Berger inquiry and worked through a number of formative inquiries dealing with Indigenous matters. And it made me think back to some of the research that I've done in the past, which acquainted me with the fact that early in the colonial days of Great Britain in Canada, the Commission was a very favored means of digging into what the government and the colonizers thought was this Indian problem. And commissions were struck to decide all kinds of things. And this was the beginning, I think, of a structure in Canada where good government on the part of Canada was not something that was ever shared with Indigenous peoples. Bad government was shared with Indigenous peoples, and every now and again, a royal commission or a commission would be struck to kind of look into something that bad government had overlooked, or look into something that bad government had messed up, or something like that. That is a pattern that was struck before Confederation, and it still prevails. Well, it did prevail until Kim started opening the door on it and letting the ugly secret out. Because the hearings, or the inquiries that Kim looked at were transformative in the sense that they started because the Government of Canada wanted something. Like they wanted a pipeline, for example, down Mackenzie, or some other thing, or some terrible problem happened that they had to deal with and couldn't deal with in any other way. And so they struck a commission, I think hoping that these commissions would enable them to wrap up the problem in shiny covers and stick the problem on a shelf somewhere where the shiny covers could get covered in dust. And we've seen that happen to some notable commissions about Indigenous people, namely RCAP, Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples in Canada. And I think Canada has been a bit shocked that it didn't happen to some other inquiries, like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which had adopted a different model of commissions and inquiries, and therefore has had a reach much more influential. And so this is where Kim really starts to go onto center stage, because changing the nature of commissions, changing the format in which commissions operate so that they can accomplish more than simply solve a problem or help the government put it on a shelf, is one of the things that Kim does best. And it is one of the things to which she has devoted her professional life for the last over a decade. And it can only do good to have more people read Kim's book and more people listen to her ideas, because Canada still does nothing or does inadequate things or maybe even bad things with respect to Indigenous peoples. And we need more light shed on that, light that is not going to be put out by having a fancy cover wrapped around it and being stuck on a shelf. And so when Kim innovates the form and the purpose of commissions of inquiry, she does us all a service, and sometimes we don't even realize it, because the commissions that are going to be organized along the lines advocated for by Kim are commissions that will enter the spirit of a nation's life, that will be communicating their research and what they have discovered, not just in the report at the end, but throughout, so that the commission becomes not just a process of inquiry, but a process of change. And these kinds of things that Kim is advocating, and now that she has put into practice in this amazing commission in Nova Scotia, they are changing our world. And Kim, I'm so grateful to you for that.
There are rules that one should follow, and not following Mary Eberts is one of those rules. So I'm not sure how I didn't make some arrangements to ensure that didn't happen. But I've learned. I've learned. It's such an incredible pleasure and treat to be able to be here, and to be here in this gathering. Right, there is something remarkable as you look around this room about the kind of leadership. Fierce and incredible leadership around public interest, around law, around what justice needs to look and feel like. That Kim's book and this opportunity has been sort of an epicenter for. So, I sit here looking out. Any number of you, we could just sort of start a sharing circle about the ways in which this matters to us, the existence and the presence of this book, of Kim's work and research, and our shared gratitude, not only for it, but for what it means for the world. It also feels like a gathering long in coming, right? So I sometimes go to to marriage or commitment ceremonies where people are like, and this is the beginning. And I'm like, and often actually the truth is this is the celebration of something that is and is important. And it feels like this celebration is not about a launch or a beginning, but a celebration of something that has been making an impact in the world already and in such significant ways for such a period of time that it feels right and good that we should pause and celebrate it and commit ourselves to ensuring that more and others can benefit from this knowledge. So I thought I'd take the few minutes I have. I had to have notes because I needed to make sure that I could say a few things and not all the things that I think about the importance of the book. And as I was rereading it for this, I was like, oh, I think we should apply Kim's own standards of how we should assess a truth commission or public inquiry to her book. And she identifies for us that two things matter: leadership and process. And so I thought I'd say just a few words about the leadership that is evident and present in this book and as it's moved out in the world, and the process that it calls us into and to move forward. So leadership, this is the easy one, right, is to talk about Kim's leadership that she brought to this book. It matters who writes things like this. It matters how they write things like this. And Kim is singular in her passion and her purpose about this work. It is not an academic project for the sake of being an academic project. It is a manifestation of her lived out commitment to the public interest. It's not an assessment from some outsider of a curiosity of why do we have these public inquiries and how do truth commissions fit into this, but actually very clearly someone standing in the midst of and caring about and deeply committed to the project of social change and transformation that these institutions should be about, could be about, and in their best moments are about. She clearly brings together knowledge of worlds that sometimes don't talk to each other around the use of public inquiries in the history of our country and then into as a government tool and process, but bringing that together with some of the knowledge and insight she's experienced in other contexts where truth commissions and processes of inquiry are helping us deal with our past so we can build a better future, and bringing that lens to bear on what public inquiries need to be if they're to be transformative and fully representative of our calling in terms of building a better, more democratic future. So the process, partly the process of writing this is to make a difference. And in fact, so much so that she started making a difference ahead of having time to launch her book. And I think that speaks to the spirit that works throughout the book. There is a spirit of this not being a final or a moment of assessment, but there's movement in the book. It is compelling. It is calling us to think about these things, to think hard about these things, to start thinking about the future and building it and using this kind of the questions she raises, the information she offers us, the challenges she makes. As the beginning of the work that we need to be about. And so it's a traveling companion. It's not a book you read once and think, oh, isn't that a nice assessment of the past? It's something that can accompany us as we look to what we need to do next. And I think she's put that study into action that represents itself as she weaves the narrative of her role and her place and her calling to be part of this. So she puts that into action in the book. We see that in her life's work and the impact that this is already having in terms of the work that I know that you were involved with her around the Murdered and Missing Women's Inquiry, in thinking about how to put into practice really quickly a lot of the insights from the book and her work at the Mass Casualty Commission. And then there is the bravery that's represented in the book. That is the hardest thing to do when you are a critical friend of those you care about most. And so there is an unflinching truth-telling in this book that models for us the very thing we hope public inquiries and truth commissions can find, which is a place and space with no hubris, that isn't adversarial, but yet tells very hard and difficult truths for those of us who've tried to do things that matter and failed to do that in the way in which is required. And she does that honestly, and she does that with the humility and the passion of someone who cares about traveling along with those who inevitably will try hard and not always get it right. And I think that's a remarkable model for the difference the book will make and for why we need more of Kim Stanton's voice as we move forward to think about justice transformation.
Thank you so much to both of you for, I think, a really compelling articulation of the very significant contributions of the book. I have one follow-up question because I think it's a really central strand of the book and a really intriguing one. And that is, what do you see Kim's articulation of the role of democracy and of democratic participation in public inquiries? What is it that she's calling for us to do? And as you say, she begins with Berger. Why is that so important to the account?
I'm going to break my rule and let you go first. Again.
Well, this may be sort of an outlier view, but in many important respects, democracy is moribund, if not dead, in this country. I think it's a bit better, in a bit better shape than what we find below the border. But democracy and having a successful democracy is something that as a citizenry we have to practice all the time. We can't let it go. We can't just bring it out when it's time for an election. There has to be a consciousness of what being a citizen is, what being citizens in common may accomplish, and what we think of the common weal, the common good, and the rule of law. We have to have those things all present all the time. And one of the things I think that has happened and that Kim has documented so brilliantly is that as the democratic process itself has become either moribund or in some cases quite bizarre, people have turned to other forms and other shapes in our society. And a lot of the policy making and the thinking that has kind of come into our society in the past few years has actually been done in commissions of inquiry. And so the more a commission of inquiry is open to the public, the more it can perform that essential, not just deliberative function, but rescue function in our society. And I think, too, that the ideal of democracy applied in the context of a public inquiry can be educational for those who participate in it, who may not have reached the old age that I have, where I can claim that I've actually seen some effective democracy functioning. And so for those who may not have seen those increasingly rare experiences, it's great to be able to walk in the door of a public inquiry as if you were a citizen and you belong there, as you do, or as if you were a resident or simply belong there, no matter what your category, and experience a respect for your views, an expectation that you will respect the views of others, an expectation that there is some common problem solving to be done. All of that can be inspirational, and it is one of the life support systems for our democracy right now.
Yeah, I think in some ways will resonate about the significance of seeing I think part of what Kim's book does in bringing together truth commissions that often happen in the context of significant social conflict, where what is at stake actually is often much clearer, much more obvious, that this idea of our society making and social impact and social significance in the context of truth commissions, where we're trying to transition out of war and harm and often autocratic contexts where we don't have democracy, where the social building of our fabric and our values is clear, that bringing that lens then to bear on our thinking about public inquiries raises that function and that significance and importance of public inquiries for reaffirming and building and rebuilding democracy in places where we might be more self-smug and satisfied that it's not so obviously missing when it is. I think there's a huge challenge that I don't want to lose in the book, that in that shift to start to see the social significance as about more than just making policy recommendations, as more than an exercise for the elite. And I think this is where I'm picking up on that sense of belonging, which is a challenge that I saw. Oh, I have this favorite moment in the Mass Casualty Commission, which I'm threatening to teach an entire course rooted in the law school at some point, which maybe I won't get to do, but maybe this is the moment where I get to say. So there is a particular lawyer at one point in the commission who, when Commissioner Stanton asks a question that is around the thinking more broadly about how we might approach this finding of truth in a way that isn't just ticking the boxes on inclusion, but is more participatory, thinking about what robust truth finding has to involve in terms of democratic participation, literally stops and rolls his eyes in such and I don't know who was on the camera that day, but the camera like zooms right in on him, and it is like it embodies all of the threat that making these kinds of institutions, ones that are open and democratic and functioning differently and inviting the public interest to be pursued in ways that is not just about public opinion, and destabilizes those who've had the voice and been able to utilize these institutions for their legal ends rather than our public interest. It represents in one very long eye roll, and at the same time represents the patience and dignity of a commissioner that didn't say anything back to him. And so I think that is a challenge to us as we rethink these institutions, that we're going to have to think about how to refashion them in ways that others participate, that other voices are leading and participating and having voice in them as we rebuild our democratic engagement with one another.
Thank you both so much. So I think it's time to invite the author to stop lurking at the back of the room.
Thank you so much for your generosity in being here, flying across the country, in one case flying from the East Coast. I've got people from both coasts. I'm trying to be very inclusive of our whole geography. And it's wonderful to see such a room full of caring, compassionate people who know that the public interest matters and who dedicate themselves to it in so many ways. So I'm really touched to see you all here. This has been a very long time in coming. I started thinking about these things when I was in Ghana, being an observer of the National Reconciliation Commission 20 plus years ago now. And I came back and decided to focus in grad school on the question of why is it that established democracies don't have truth commissions or don't call them truth commissions when we clearly have countries littered with historical injustices. And what we do tend to do is we have commissions of inquiry. And so I wrote about that, and patient doctoral supervisor is present and knows that I got very fixated on the Berger inquiry, the Mackenzie Valley Pipeline inquiry early on. And Steve Gouge, who was commission counsel on that inquiry, is kind enough to be here. And I was honored to get to meet Tom Berger a couple of times when I was doing my research for my book, but more about that in a moment. I ended up taking every weekend and holiday that I could while at the firm that I've been at prior to the commission to write this book. And thanks to Randy Schmidt, who's here from UBC Press, and the good folks at UBC Press for persevering through not 2, but 4 peer reviews, which ended up delaying things a bit. And then, of course, I got appointed to this commission of inquiry, which was a little inconvenient for our publication schedule, because I had to ask that we try not to have the book come out while our hearings were going on, but our hearing schedule being what it was, expanded and shifted, and so I then had to speak to the poor marketing manager at UBC Press, who I'm sure has never had an author say, please, please don't market my book. Please, if you could just not market my book until I finish as a commissioner. And the commission finally closed last Monday, May 15th. And so I'm now finally free to talk about my first book, and I'm delighted to be able to share it with all of you now. I've had just tremendous support from friends and from family here and afar, and I'm so grateful to all of them and all of you for your support as I've gone on this journey. Tom Berger's innovations, some of which were modeled on Gerald Ledain's innovations in the Royal Commission on Non-Medicinal Drugs in the late 60s, early 70s, were really about how do we make public inquiries truly public. And I never, of course, imagined that I would be asked to be a commissioner when I was writing about commissions of inquiry. And I know that each inquiry has its own challenges, and we certainly were no exception. We had our inquiry through a global pandemic, and amidst a time when a populace was distinctly distrustful of public institutions, and that was emblematic with the trucker convoys that were happening while we were also having our hearings and so on. And there were social media storms, which I don't think inquiries before us have really encountered in the same way. And then, of course, our mandate had the trifecta of policing and firearms and gender-based violence. So we made our way through those, I think, with extraordinary people surrounding us, some of whom are in the room today. And so when I talk about how leadership and process matter, part of leadership is really surrounding yourself with really smart people who really care about making sure that the public interest is served. And we were extraordinarily fortunate to have the people here that worked with us who felt strongly and were committed to doing that. The book is really focused on the inquiries that we've had with respect to Indigenous rights matters in this country. One person who couldn't be here today is Meg Sywink, and the book starts with a conversation that I had with Meg. Her sister Sonia was among the many missing and murdered Indigenous women, and Meg had, with me, called for the national inquiry, and it was the conversation with her that really compelled me to write the book. But I think in some ways the fact that she and Bev Jacobs and Kira Ladner, who sends her regrets, couldn't join us today is okay, because one of the things that I really want to get across in the book is that it's really non-Indigenous people who need to do the heavy lifting to address the injustices in our country that continue on today. And so if you do anything in reading this book, I hope what you'll do is carry forward that understanding that it's really on us to do the work, to improve how we are in relation with one another in this land. And I'm just incredibly grateful to have you all here. And I want to thank Massey College and Natalie DeRose, the principal. Massey was my home, literally, for a couple of years of my graduate studies and has been my home on campus ever since. And it's a real pleasure to be back here after a number of years away now and to be welcomed into this space. So thank you, everyone, and please visit amongst yourselves.
So we are going to reopen the bar, and the books are there to be purchased if you do want. And I want to thank Dr. Cunliffe and all our speakers, and thank you for choosing to discuss this book, this important process, this important issue with all of us here. And please come back to Massey. There's lots of, we need more good discussions and to sustain, I think, our commitment to the public good, which is Massey's mission is to nourish learning and serve the public good, and its motto is dare to be wise, which means that, to be wise, you have to push your limits and you have to reflect a lot. And I think that's what we're trying to do here. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.